Morning, everybody. I'll start this meeting today. I'd like to confirm at the annual meeting of the County Council held on 15th of May 2023, Mr. Barclay was nominated as Chairman-elect to the Local Pension Committee, and I have a proposer and seconder that Mr. Barclay be nominated as Chair. Thank you, Mr. Barclay. You were appointed Chairman of the Local Pension Committee for the 2024-25 municipal year, and I will hand over to you for the rest of the meeting.
Welcome to today's meeting of the Local Pension Committee. As usual, this meeting is being broadcast live to the public. For those not able to watch live, the webcast will be recorded and made available for viewing on the County Council website after the meeting. Before we start, can I just remind members to turn on their microphones when you wish to speak, and then don't forget to turn them off after you've finished speaking. I'm sure all members of the committee are aware that we are currently in a pre-election period of heightened sensitivity running up to the general election, and will take particular care in any debate this morning. The next item is the appointment of the chair, deputy chair. I nominate Mr. Grimley. Could I have a seconder? Thank you, Mrs. Fry. All in favour? Yep. Okay, so Mr. Grimley is appointed as deputy chair. I've received apologies from Mr. Grimley this morning, and I welcome Mrs. Maggie Wright, who is present as a substitute for Mr. Grimley. I also have apologies from Mr. King, Councillor Denny, Mr. Pitt and Mr. Bill. I would like to welcome Mrs. Hilary Fryer, County Councillor, and Mr. James Henry from Loughborough University to the meeting for their first time as members. So I welcome to you both, and as we go on, I'm sure you'll get involved in it. So, next item is minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of March 2024. I propose that the minutes meeting held on the 8th of the meeting held on the 8th of March 2024 are taken as read, confirmed, agreed, and signed also. Is that agreed? Yeah. Question time. I've received no questions. Questions asked by members under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5. I received no questions. To advise of any other items which the chairman has decided to take as urgent elsewhere on the agenda. I've not been notified of any urgent item. So, declaration of interest. Does any member have any declarations they wish to declare? I think it'd be unusual if you did, but you know, yeah, that's fine. Thank you. So, the first substantive item on today's agenda is the Risk Management Internal Control Report at page 17 to 38 of the agenda. Ian Howe, Pensions Manager, will introduce the report and will hand over to Neeru Patel, Internal Audit Manager. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. This is the Internal Risk Register report and the internal audit update as well, which we incorporated into this single report for this meeting. I'm going to touch on two elements. I'm just going to do the risk register element and the external audit review and the outcome of that from the 22-23 accounts and report. So starting with the risk register. It's the standard risk register that comes to both board and committee at each meeting. There are 19 risks split into 6 different areas: investments, liability, employer risk, governance, operational and regulatory. There are no changes to any of the risk scores since the last time this was reported to the committee, which was back in March. We have, however, changed a number of the risks from treat to tolerate, because we accept that those risks will continue, but we just manage them and we continue to watch those. One of them I just wanted to mention, which is risk 6, and that's where the fund fails to receive accurate and timely data from employers. Scheme member pension benefits could be incorrect or late and includes year-end data. I just wanted to mention for information for the members here, that last year East Midlands Shared Service Centre ended the contract to provide payroll services for LCC schools and academies that were previously paid through East Midlands Shared Services. A large number of those employers moved across to an employer called, a payroll provider called Dataplan, and they share the work with a sub-provider called Iris. So it's Iris and Dataplan. We have had some problems getting all the data from that payroll provider because they've taken on so much work, really. They have taken on a lot of employers. There is active meetings taking place in regards getting this data in, and it is beginning to come through, and these meetings are taking place weekly. But we do still have a number where we are still waiting for their replies back on the data query. So I just wanted to raise that just for awareness. If we think that this is still going to be a problem in the next quarter, we'll obviously refer that back to board and both board and committee in terms of the output that would the impact that could then have on the year end for annual benefit statements. But I'm just flagging it really at this stage. In terms of the external audit and the outcome for the 22-23, that's point 36 onwards within the report. I just wanted to mention that there were no material adjustments required, which is good news. There was only one non-material adjustment, which is detailed in point 39. Identified a total of 3.8 million relating to the valuation of hard valued pooled assets, which was not available when the accounts needed to be prepared. But these assets estimates had to be made as the valuations are not known for many months until after the year end. The amount was not material overall, and it was not adjusted for in the accounts. So I'm pleased to say that that's a good outcome for the 22-23. Anybody got any questions before I hand over to my colleague Nero?
Members, anybody got any questions? Maggie?
It was just around the Iris and the Dataplan and the transfer of the data, and you said a number of replies were still outstanding. Can you just give us an idea of the numbers? Was it tens or was it hundreds, or what sort of numbers are actually outstanding?
We've got, yeah, of course, thank you. We've got 5 schools where we're waiting for the information to come back, and 19 academies. So it's quite a large number, but in terms of total scheme membership, it's not that large because there's not that many members in those schools and academies. But so in terms of like employer membership numbers, it's quite high, but in terms of scheme membership, it's reasonably low. But it is actively being worked on. I think only a few weeks ago we were in sort of the position of 70 and 80. So you can see that this has come down quite considerably, to give you some context to that, and it's being actively managed weekly. Is that okay?
Thank you, Maggie. Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you, Chair. It sounds to me like you're doing all you can to support them in the transition, and the transition period for any organisation is always the most difficult. So I'm encouraged to hear what you say there. What I would be interested in, and it's not a figure you're going to have for me today, but it'd be useful to find out outside of the meeting, and that would be, of all the people that haven't reported yet, were they consistently bad reporters under the old provider? Because that tells a completely different story. Now, if the answer to that is no, then it is just a transition period. If the answer is yes, then they're prolific offenders. That's where I'm going with my question. Thank you.
Yeah, I can come back on that. We have had no issues with them previously when they had much less employers, many less employers. They had a handful of employers and they worked with us positively, and that worked well. It's literally the transition, as you rightly say, due to the numbers that they've taken on. That's really what's created the problem for us. So that gives me some confidence, and we are working positively with them as well. Is that okay?
Thank you, Ian. And any more questions? No. So no more questions. So Nero, over to you.
Morning all. I'm here to explain the internal audit arrangements for the pension fund and to provide a progress update on the work completed and also to present the plan for this financial year. We've also presented this part of the report to the local pension board back in April 24. So the first section, paragraphs 14 to 18 on pages 19 and 20, explains how the team work, the internal audit standards that we adhere to, how it plans audits and reports findings and recommendations. Paragraph 19 goes on to include information on the work completed in the last financial year, and this is outlined further in Appendix C, which is on pages 33 and 34. I'm pleased to report an overall positive position with no high importance recommendations. The report goes on to provide a few examples of the type of recommendations we've made and have been accepted. During last year, we had to defer 3 audits, mainly due to national delays, but we did manage to agree an alternative replacement for one of those deferred audits. We share all our final reports with the external auditor to inform their risk assessment for their audit of the fund's accounts. Paragraph 22 throws some light on the biennial National Fraud Initiative, known as the NFI exercise, which is a counter-fraud data matching exercise. Data had been uploaded back in October 22, with reports available in January 23. From that exercise, 4 cases were identified of continuing payments to deceased pensioners, of which 3 are still being pursued. Moving on, paragraphs 23 to 25 explain that the Pension Service also subscribes to the 6-monthly NFI mortality screening service to check our pension records against DWP's deceased persons database. This exercise allows the service to become aware of deaths at an earlier stage and has been expanded to include all pensioners. In the past, it was just overseas pensioners. The exercise was run twice in the year, in June and November 23, and identified 6 cases where payments had continued for deceased persons, 2 of which were recouped quite quickly, reducing the risk of non-recovery. The other 4 are being chased. Paragraph 26 explains how we review and place reliance on the risk register as part of our annual planning process. Moving on to paragraph 27, this explains that as well as the internal pension service audits, the team continues to collaborate with partner fund internal auditors from other councils that own LGPS Central as part of the wider internal audit working group. So as part of that work, a revised 4-year internal audit plan from 23-24 was agreed with audits allocated on a rota basis. The cyclical programme of work is shown in Appendix D on pages 35 and 36. So you'll see from that, Leicestershire are due to complete some audit work during this year on behalf of the internal audit working group. The audit will be governance focused with further discussions due to take place later on this year. Paragraphs 28 to 30 are quite important. They explain that the annual Type 1 control report produced by LGPS Central external auditors, who are Deloitte, had been delayed and it was qualified. LGPS Central asked for partners, external auditors, so Grant Thornton for Leicestershire and Section 151 officers, to agree an alternative short-term approach. Our external auditors, along with others, opted for a Type 2 report, as it would alleviate the need for them to undertake significant extra work and the fund incurring extra costs for that. However, despite this, the Audit Risk and Compliance Committee and Board at LGPS Central has decided to go with a Type 1 and agree with partners, external auditors, other forms of assurance. Moving on, the table on page 22 gives a very brief summary of performance during the year. The 6 audits were completed, with 3 audits deferred into this financial year. The recharge to the fund for this work was just under £30,000. Moving on to Appendix E, which is on pages 37 and 38. That outlines planned internal audit work for this current financial year. And we go on to explain how the plan was compiled. The cost of the planned 87 days of audit work will be in the region of around £34,000. This brings me to the end of the section. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to take those.
Thanks very much, Nero. It was a very clear summary of what's been going on. Has anybody got any questions they want to ask? Nick?
Just quickly, in terms of audit, and also with Ian, in terms that there's reference to transfers out being checked out within that.
That's right.
And has there been any fraudulent receptacles for transfers out? In other words, within that, is that part of your audit to within that? And what can Ian do, or what does he do within the regs to try and ensure that people don't transfer out to a fraudulent stroke, property in the Cape Verde Islands that doesn't exist, that kind of stuff?
Okay. Yeah, transfers out is an audit that we look at every 2 years. We look at the controls within that process to make sure they do go to legitimate companies. So far, we haven't found any major issues in that process. Okay. Yeah.
Thanks, Nero. Just to expand on that as well, Nick, the regulations were tightened last year as well around this, Nick, and the rules introduced a red, amber, green flag as well, which we now have to go through, which is kind of further detail that we now have to go into on certain transfers, not all transfers, but certain transfers, particularly overseas transfers. And we now have a further step as well, where any transfer that's over £100,000 goes through a further legal check as well, Nick, to actually establish the security and the arrangements of that scheme as well, which enhances what we've already got. So we're comfortable and confident that we're following the processes, but we do as much as we can within the rules. But ultimately, I suppose I should still say it is still scheme members' decision ultimately if they do want to go ahead. If it's red flag, I can say no, but then I can be legally challenged on that. Is that okay?
That's helpful, Ian, within that. The corollary of that is, which is rare but could happen, is when, say, a single member with long service is diagnosed with a terminal illness. It's actually quite important that they transfer out quick.
Please do, Ian.
Yeah, you're right, Nick. There is a very niche and unfortunately sad group. This is a difficult situation where if it's a single individual and they have terminal illness or very expected short life expectancy, it can be in their interest, if they've got particular circumstances, to transfer those cases out. We still go through the same level of rigour, but I would review those personally to ensure that they are still meeting the rules. But I could take on point that is a group that could actually benefit in transferring out, and we did actually have one last month.
So presumably, and that's because if they don't transfer out, they'll lose everything upon death.
It's not that they lose everything, but they actually get an enhanced value by transferring out and then using that through a personal pension arrangement to actually gain extra earlier. Effectively, that's how it works.
And presumably they'll lose their death in service benefit if they go out.
Yeah, by transferring out they do, but they then gain a benefit with a new arrangement.
And swings and roundabouts benefits, and so that's all.
But it's a very, very small niche group of individuals.
No,
but yeah, they are protected. Is that okay?
Thank you. Maggie.
Just regarding the type 1 and type 2 audit and the preference really for the type 2, so the switch to type 1, and they're saying that it'll be delivered by this August 2024. What's the probability of that being on target?
Sorry, I really don't know, to be honest. That's what we're being told. And as a group, we will be pushing for that. I'm hoping they will honour that sort of timescale, especially since they, rejected our type 2 request.
Yeah, that was the concern, that it's making the deadlines and the problems that all auditors have had at the moment with delays. So thank you.
Right, Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the audit costs, the figure you mentioned there, does that include the deferred 3 audits, or are they chargeable at the point where they were delivered? So is that a prepayment? Or is it a deferred payment? There's a payment due once they're completed. That was the first question. And the second one was around the difficult subject that you mentioned of deceased and the pension continuing to pay out incorrect amounts as a result of not being notified, for want of a better word. I accept that you talked about some being recovered very quickly, and it's a difficult area to redress. A specific question around that is, excluding the current cases which are ongoing and I wouldn't wish to pry into, are the statistics and data around how many cases historically have gone on to create that scenario? You won't be able to give me the answer now, but I'm looking for 2 answers really. The first one is how many cases historically have gone on to be that where they're closed, they're not currently ongoing, and what amount has been lost as a result of that. It's not trying to tie anybody down or embarrass anybody. It's just trying to understand what the impact of that has been from the inception to the current date, excluding the current cases. Something you're definitely not going to be able to advise us of today. But and I don't want you to spend too much time working on it, but if it is easily assemblable from the data that you have, it'd be helpful to know it at some point in the future. Thank you, Chair.
I'm sorry, I keep forgetting that. If I could go back to your first question about payment for deferred audits, I can confirm that we don't actually charge for those until the work is completed. We only charge for the work completed, and it's done at the end of the year. So the charge we've given is what was for the work completed. Yeah. And then for this year, it's an estimate based on the number of days in the plan. That's right, yeah. Is that okay? Your second question, if I can firstly say that we used to rely on the 2-yearly NFI exercise, but because it was 2 yearly, it was 2 years before it flagged up any deceased cases of continuing payments, which is why it made sense to actually enrol on the 6 monthly mortality screening service as well. And I think Ian will back me up on that. We have found the odd cases on that. In terms of numbers, I will need to come back to you on how many numbers and how much we've recouped, as well as how much is outstanding. I think one of the difficulties we have is actually reaching closure on those. Partly because people move away, we're not getting responses from legal services, solicitors, banks. So all that is taking quite a long time to bottom out. But I will come back to you and let you know the exact figures at some point. Is that?
I just would like to respond. I wasn't making any allegations, and I do support entirely that they're using more robust methods now as we learn over time to reduce the risk. I don't have any issues whatsoever. It's just an interesting figure. That was all, Chair.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine, Mr. Cartwright. Yeah. Guru, just tell me, if we do discover that payments have been made erroneously, do we stop paying them immediately? Yeah, fine.
Just follow-up question.
James.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Chair. Just a follow-up question on that. In terms of, we've moved from 2-year to 6 monthly screening.
Yes.
Is there a limiting factor on that cost or time to process, i.e. why is that not live or daily or weekly? What's the limiting factor?
The limiting factor is the exercise is quite a big exercise and it's run nationally. We don't actually, we take part in the exercise, but it's actually run by the Cabinet Office. So it's the time taken for them to actually process all the information and compile the reports and send those to us. Okay.
Hilary.
Thank you very much, Chair. On that subject too, 6 monthly, that's when you're notified or can find out that someone has deceased. Therefore, if they have a pension, you can get rid. To my mind, that seems quite unreasonable. Probates take 6 months, up to 6 months. Plus, if people have died in unusual circumstances, it can often take months to identify where and when they are deceased. I've had that within my own family, and it took 4 months to get a death certificate. They didn't know they died on a plane somewhere across the Atlantic. Who was responsible? So I think 6 months is a reasonable figure and manageable. That's all I would like to say.
Ian.
Just to expand on that slightly, we do also run a process every month for deaths that come through to us through another death tracing service. The point that Niru is talking about is the national exercise that takes place every 6 months. So we have an ongoing monthly process that we do within pensions, and then we have the extra 6 monthly backup, which effectively gives us 99% of the cases we already know about, plus these small numbers that we don't, and they tend to be, the example you use is a primate one. That would be on the case that Niru would have that we wouldn't. It tends to be overseas pensioners that have passed away and we aren't aware, or where there tends to be criminal activity. So the police have put a close on the case and we don't get to know them until the national exercise. So that's where you do get the potential of, let's say, 6 months overpayment if the death's happened, and then we're notified 6 months afterwards. But as soon as we're aware, we do close the pension. Is that all right, just to give some extra context around that?
That's helpful, thank you, Ian. So, are there no other questions? So thank you, Ian, thank you, Niru, for a very clear report on that. We're going to, the committee is asked to note the report and also approve the revised pension fund risk register. I'm happy to move the recommendation. Can I have a second there? Thank you, Mrs. Fryer, thank you. Is that agreed? Yep. Okay. So the next item is item 9, the report on responsible investing updated, pages 39 to 90 of the agenda. A fairly comprehensive report, which shows we're actually above the curve on most items. Kat, over to you as responsible investment analyst.
Morning, members. So this is the normal quarterly responsible investment update. So I'll quickly go through all those items that are set out in that purpose of the report. So if I start on the responsible investment plan, this is what the committee agreed in January. So this is just the regular update to that in Appendix A. So it includes a bit more detail about information as well as timelines for ongoing activities throughout the year. All scheduled activities are on track. Progress continues to align with the fund's approach to responsible investment and the net zero climate strategy. So, for example, at the investment subcommittee in April, Hyman's review of the protection assets, that included quite a lengthy section on climate impacts and how that factors into their considerations. Additionally, we've begun speaking to Central on the next iteration of the climate risk report, and we've incorporated a number of pieces of member feedback into that process as part of the next report. But course, always welcome any comments from members if there's anything they want to see specifically, but we'll be reporting on that in September about what we expect to bring, and then that will formally come to committee in the November committee meeting. On to kind of the, I guess, most weighty part of this agenda item. This includes the Fund's Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures report, which is set out from page 57. This is the framework that helps companies, asset managers and asset owners measure, monitor and manage climate risks and opportunities. So members that have been on the committee for a while will know this is something that we've been reporting on since 2020, and this is something that private pension schemes have already been required to adhere to. Government consulted for the LGPS in 2022, and committee approved a consultation response in November 2022, which supported the proposals while highlighting areas that need further clarification and guidance. The fund has been reporting under these guidelines in any case, just because we see the value it gives in the development of our risk assessment and management processes for climate risk and opportunities. When looking across the LGPS, we see only 25 out of 86 funds are currently publicly reporting against TCFD recommendations, and this isn't necessarily to the same extent or frequency, which we are doing alongside LGPS Central. So this latest TCFD report incorporates recommendations from 2023 Climate Risk Management Report, as well as the Pension Regulator's Review of Private Pension Schemes publications. So for this iteration, some key changes include an executive summary, a roadmap of progress the fund has taken, as well as next steps, as well as reflects the last year's approval of the Net Zero Climate Strategy, and the report goes into more detail on committee discussions, challenges faced by the fund, investment managers and LGPS Central, as well as progress with stewardship plan companies. So as is the kind of normal framework, it goes into more detail on the governance strategy and risk management of the fund, so how the fund considers physical and transition risks over relevant timeframes, as well as the metrics and targets, which we can see are on track versus the targets set in the Net Zero Climate Strategy. The report also highlights that over £1 billion in assets have been invested in climate-related solution type investments, such as the Climate Multi-Factor Fund and the Sustainable Forestry. The report sets out engagement with BP, Shell and Glencore, and of course shows our reduction in weighted average carbon intensity by 38%, so well on track to that 50% reduction target by 2030. There's still progress to be made on the TCFD, so one of the actions from the Climate Risk Management Report was integration of climate scenario analysis, which looked across investments and the funding strategy. And that's something we're working with partners and kind of paying a lot of close attention to emerging work in the area across the industry, and something to be aware of for the next triennial valuation, as well as future reporting with Central. I'll pause there on the TCFD section before I go on to the next part if members have questions on Appendix C.
Okay, thanks. I mean, this is an incredibly comprehensive report. Has anybody got any questions? Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just a comment and sort of something I'd like to put on record, really. As we wade through the treacle of trying to do the best by everybody and a climate and the emergency and all the different issues we face, I was very grateful to Captain Boulesh, who agreed to meet me, and we had a very positive discussion for quite some time around this subject. This is available to all members. I took the opportunity to do that. I'm not making that point for any other reason than thanking them for that opportunity and the positive discussion that take place that will help structure, choosing my words carefully, how we approach the reporting over time. I'd like to stress that that is available rather than a big forum like this to any member to do so. I took the advantage. I found it helpful. I'm grateful for their time and experience and those discussions, and just want to place that on record, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cartwright. I think that's very encouraging to hear. I think we're moving very much in the right direction. As time moves on, metrics we can measure will increase.
Has there been any pushback from anyone relating to Exxon? Because they've an egregious idea of actually suing some of their actual shareholders for putting forward a climate-related motion to their committee. That's the owners of the company being sued by the management, which is actually grotesque, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think the last I saw is maybe they've withdrawn that at this point, but I'd have to double check. It's something central and LGIM are well aware of, and obviously it's don't consider it acceptable to be treating shareholders in that way, but it kind of feeds into a lot of ESG backlash, which we're seeing in America. So kind of those American companies are kind of trying to fight back a bit more versus what kind of some of the European companies are. But I probably feed that into next quarter's report, because we're having AGM season at the moment, so kind of have a look at that backlash and how it's going, because I think Shell did a similar thing, but yeah, I can feed that into next report.
Thank you, Nick. It's I was surprised to see that. It seemed very odd, particularly sort of the impetus towards actually complying with the government regulations and actually trying to reduce carbon and everything else. Why would a company sue its shareholders for putting forward a resolution to improve things? Mad. Anyhow, any other questions? Right, Mr. Becker.
Hi, just a quick question on the two metrics. So the weighted average carbon intensity and the normalized financed emissions. Could you just talk us through that a little bit, please?
Yeah, this was the second point I was kind of going to go to, but if no one's got any questions on the TCFD report, I'll kind of.
Okay, so you're happy with that one, Mr. Becker? We'll come to that. Yeah, all right. So carry on.
Yeah, just to reiterate, always happy to meet members like Councillor Cartwright says, so that's always open. Let me just find my spot. Right, let me scroll. Yeah, so these, so from point 13, so this is where I've tried to benchmark the fund versus other LGPS funds. So this is kind of a very rough kind of table in that there's not similar comparisons out there at the moment. And before I kind of go into the data, just to caveat, it's this is just where it looks like they're using the same methodology. So they're using kind of scope 1 and 2 emissions. But I can't kind of control for the date that they've taken their data snapshot or kind of how the data providers underlying that kind of might affect the data, or kind of if it's from managers or not, and whether it's reported, estimated, or there's kind of some other calculations within that. So these are the two kind of most widely used metrics. So weighted average carbon intensity, that is so like tons of carbon divided by £1 million in revenue. So this is basically a proxy for carbon price risk. So if you have really carbon intensive companies, say Exxon, and their revenue, for example, is kind of their revenue is kind of low, then they'll have a really high weighted average carbon intensity. So if you think about carbon taxes and the potential for them to come in, those companies are more risky in terms of how much the kind of carbon tax on the company, if that makes sense. Whereas normalized financed emissions is just the tons of carbon per £1 million that we have invested. So you can compare like for like against each metric, but they're not they don't show the whole picture because they're only backwards looking. So it's hard to take kind of definitive conclusions from this. It just kind of is there to show versus the other LGPS funds, we're 102 for our WACC. So that seems to be fairly in line, if not better than most funds. And then the normalised finance emissions, that's a metric which isn't as disclosed. But I think if government come in with TCFD guidance for LGPS funds, then we'll probably see a better coverage overall. So looking into one of the funds that has one of the lower weighted average carbon intensities that I can see publicly. So we can see from their investments that they invested in a Paris-aligned investment fund. And this is something that investment subcommittee actually considered as part of the papers in April 2023. So following Hyman's advice, committee instead agreed to invest in a low carbon transition fund, which they're similar, but obviously not. There are differences within the makeup of the mandate. And that low carbon transition fund reduces that initial exposure to carbon emitting assets by 70% compared to the market benchmark, and we should see that further reduce year on year in line with that 7% reduction in line with the Paris Agreement. And I suppose when ISC considered that decision most aligned to net zero climate strategy in support of that 2030 target, and also supporting real world emission reductions through engagement and the risk appetite of the fund. But one thing that table, I guess, doesn't show us is starting point. So we've reduced our WACC by 38%. How that compares with the other funds, you can't tell. So we may have had a kind of a bigger or smaller reduction compared to other funds. Does that answer, or is there anything specific on that point? Onto some of the other areas, just to flag, LGPS Central had their Responsible Investment Summit on the 5th of June. So members should have had emails about how they can access that if they weren't able to attend. So hopefully members found that useful, but we've got a few things we can take away from that to kind of feed into future reporting and how we approach stewardship, as well as our managers. There's also the normal voting and engagement reports, and just to flag that since March committee, where Central presented their new stewardship strategy, they've now incorporated that into their quarterly reports. So this report has a lot about the objectives and the progress that's made over the quarter versus their objectives. And the only other thing to flag is Hymans Robertson. So they released a new responsible investment mission statement, which I think reflects quite well in terms of how the fund takes responsible investment. So it's positive that they've kind of published that, and that should support their advice to us going forward. But if any questions on any of the other parts, I'll take them.
Okay, so any other questions? No? No? So that concludes your report then, Kat? Yeah? Have you finished?
Oh, sorry,
said everything you wanted to say.
Yeah.
Right, well, I mean, it really is a comprehensive report, and we're not perfect, but we're certainly moving in the right direction very heavily, and better than a lot of funds, which is really encouraging news. So the committee has been asked to note the report. Is that agreed? Yeah, that's agreed then. Thank you. So item 10. This is an item that I know Ian holds dear to his heart. The Cloud Remedy Progress Report. So Ian, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I do. I dream about this, Chair. Or should I say have nightmares? Anyway, for the benefit of maybe the newer members here, this is the work to effectively address the age discrimination case that was brought against the government when we moved from a final salary scheme to a career average scheme in 2014. The original regulations protected members who were within 10 years of retirement, and that was challenged by younger members who won. And that's what the McLeod remedy is doing. It's effectively addressing that age discrimination. It sounds really simple, but when you actually start to delve into it, it's far from simple. There's a huge amount of administration involved here. Sadly, for not many people that will actually gain a benefit, and those that do, the benefit increase is pretty low, but we have to do this. So in terms of where we are, this is a position statement, I should say. In terms of where we are, we've embedded McLeod calculations into business as usual for ongoing retirements and leavers. The deaths, it's slightly more complex, but we are working through deaths as well. We effectively have to recreate the death and then move it forward and then roll it forward for the McLeod element. So deaths is working, but it's quite time consuming. The areas where we still haven't implemented McLeod are transfers. At the moment, transfers are done manually. That is a particularly complex area, and I'm lobbying the system providers in order for them to effectively build their systems to allow us to do calculations through the system again. I'm not the only fund who's doing that, and that's been escalated within the system provider that we use within what we call the class group, which is a management group that lobbies the system provider to actually implement McLeod into calculations for transfers, and that would certainly help us. The areas that we haven't yet done and still need to are quite large though. We haven't completed all the hour inputs from all the employers. We have received a huge amount of data from the employers, which is fantastic, and I'm extremely grateful for all the employers in engaging with us on this. We plan to complete that by the end of the calendar year, and we're on track to do that. Then we've got to go back and look at all the retirements and leavers since April 2014 to November 2013 and recalculate those benefits to see if any of them trigger an underpin, and if they do, we would then have to put them into payment. That brings its own complexities of things like the recalculation of the annual allowance or the lifetime allowance for people who are triggered, but hopefully they are going to be very, very, very low numbers. So they will be the exception. We've also got to update all the active members' information for the annual benefit statements from August 2025. I'm pleased to say we don't have to do it for August this year, but we have got to do it for August 25. So that's an ongoing piece of work that all funds are challenging, and we're working through that. And then we've got what we call the teachers' excess services, which is a really rather unusual element to McLeod. But under the teachers' pension schemes, anybody who had greater than full time that's in scope for McLeod under the teachers' regulations can't have extra service in the teachers' scheme. So that by its nature then triggers an extra benefit into the LGPS scheme, which we've then got to work with the teachers' pension scheme and employers that employ teachers, and we're going to have to work through those, set up records for those individuals, and then bizarrely, if the member then wants to transfer it, they can then transfer it back to the teachers' scheme, which seems quite illogical, but unfortunately that's the way the regulations have been written. In terms of where we are on KPIs, and this is the point I did want to raise, this is impacting on our key performance indicators. And if you look at the appendix attached to this report, you can see that since October 23, when McLeod went live, you can see it's starting to really impact on our KPIs, and they are starting to fall away. Now, we are doing all we can to bring those back, but it's extremely challenging. We are doing overtime. That's been extended very shortly, so we've got more people who are qualified now to be able to do overtime, which is great. We've got 2 apprentices that start very shortly in July. They'll be able to help us on this as well, which will be fantastic. and we are recruiting for some vacant posts, which will really help us as well. So we're doing all we possibly can to address this. But it is, I have to be honest with you, it is impacting. And those KPIs reflect that. So I am pleased that we've held data for so long so you can actually see the impact of when McCloud's kicking in. In terms of the numbers, just to give you a context to this, of the cases that we've actually calculated that are actually qualifying for McCloud, which is just a fraction over 1,000 so far, 1,003, only 32 cases have actually had an increase. So you put that into context, it's a fraction of the increase, but it's the administration that we have to go through to get to this. And that's what we have to do because that's what the regulations state. So it is a position statement, and I'm very welcome any questions.
So out of all the cases in, so out of the 1,000, there are 100,000 in the pension scheme roughly, and you're saying there's so far only 33 cases have been identified. I appreciate what you're saying. You have to go through every case individually, but my goodness, it's a massive amount of work, and no wonder you're struggling. Anyhow, enough said. It's can't right.
Thank you. Well, I've always been encouraged by the speed and the quality of the reaction to this by officers, and I'll reiterate that point, Chairman. But and it's quite interesting that of the 32, there's only 32 to learn that figure too. But that's not the overall story here. The 1,003 is the big story because that takes just as long as there's more work once you identify somebody needs redress under this scheme. But the 1,003 still is a massive exercise to get through that amount of people. My question, Chair, is around 2 points really. Around, so in re-evaluating everybody, we know what the scale of the exercise is because we know the number of people in the scheme, and each individual one needs to be looked at. But in terms of understanding the way forward, Chair, there are those that are going to get an automatic reassessment because they don't even know McCloud exists. That's one element of the clientele, if you like. The second element of the clientele is those that believe they've been wronged or they've heard it in the news and they're desperate for an answer and they want the money now. I'm sure you've come across that scenario. You must have done. They're being the minority, I would say. But in terms of those two different scenarios, so the automatic evaluation because we're doing the right thing, and those that are coming forward because they believe they've been wronged because of incorrect information, or they possibly even have done. I'm not putting forward any accusations there. How do we deal with what is a structure? So on your day-to-day work, you're looking at cases that are just going to be surprised by the outcome when you get in touch with them because they didn't even know it was taking place. And those that are pushing for a more quicker answer, how do you differentiate? Do they automatically jump to the front of the queue is where I'm going? And does the other work get put on hold because they're more vocal? Or how do you have a level, fair playing field to see that, that the two trajectories go on in harmony to the best of your ability without impeding one or the other? I think you get what I'm going.
Ian, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, in terms of those points, the vast majority of people, I think you're right. They say they don't understand McCloud, they don't know about McCloud, so we're not being asked by them. So those people are being pleasantly surprised, as you say. There are a small number, and it is small, who have been very, very vocal since the very beginning. And these were people who were vocal before October. These were people who knew about this months prior to that. Only, I would say, 20 or 30 of those have written in and complained. So we've taken them out and we've done them because it was quicker to do it that way than just leave them in a pile, to be truthful. Of those, I think only 2 got an increase, and they were very small increases. But it's resolved those. Everybody else, we're now making them go through the process effectively, which is what we believe is the fair way of doing it because it's fair with everybody else. We still need data from the employers in order for us to run the bulk calculations anyway. And that's the thing that's creating some angst with some individuals when they're saying, well, our employer sent all the information through, but you still can't do it because this other employer hasn't. But that's just a piece of work we manage. That's the reality of it. But I would say that isn't a major issue for us, in truth. Most people have been very patient, very understanding, and accept that the increases are so negligible. It'll happen when it happens.
Thanks very much, Ian. Thank you.
Be interested, Ian. Have you got any metric or whatever within that as to the cost of administration over the cost of actual benefits that's been paid out?
Nick, you're not the only person to ask that. This is being asked at a national level as well, as you can imagine. I don't have the metrics, but you can understand why those questions are being asked. I don't have that, Nick, to be truthful. I'm more, if I'm honest, being concentrating on getting it done. But those questions are being asked, Nick, and I expect at some point that will be presented at some sort of level at nationally. If that becomes available, I will share that with committee.
Yeah, I mean, I would suggest it would outstrip the actual benefits by 100 to 1, without a doubt. But the reality is this was a High Court ruling. The government has said that we've got to do it, and we have got to do it. Despite the work that it takes, and despite the fact there isn't a lot of benefits there. Right, any more questions? James. James, I'll come to you.
Yeah, just onto the KPIs. So if I interpret correctly, this is an issue that affects a relatively small population. I think this is going to go on for a significant period of time. And I think we can identify the people that it impacts. We just don't know when it's going to come to fruition. Because I guess the challenge is this issue then impacts all of the population and kind of impacts the KPIs in a way that it's done. So it's just a question, has there been any consideration about whether there could almost be pre-identification or two funnels, so that the kind of the population where we know it's not an issue doesn't kind of have an impact to the extent that it's doing. Because I guess the danger with this set of KPIs is when things slow down, it creates more work through questions, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah, we kind of already doing that. These figures are really reflective of that already, in truth. So those cases that are just career average only, so somebody who's started in the scheme since April 14 isn't affected by this, that sort of scenario. So they are still going through quite quickly, to be honest. But this is the position with that strong side still happening. Does that answer that?
It does. Thank you.
Okay, so Bipple.
Yeah, my question just to appreciate the level of work there. Like, what has been the administrative burden? I can see you've gone to sort of hire additional pension assistants and apprentices, but what sort of hours are we sort of thinking of increased workload a sort of week has been? Which I appreciate.
Yeah, I haven't got that to hand, in truth. I can't answer that on the honest answer. Honest answer. I don't have a sort of a figure in terms of how this, in terms of hours, has impacted on us. That's the best I can present in terms of how it's affecting us in terms of the KPIs. I can look at things like the overtime spikes and things like that, but that's now already up there. It can't really go any higher because we are where we are. The extra resource is going to help us, though. I can't pretend otherwise. I think it's just continuing to grind through it is the honest answer, and maintain the scheme members, try and assure scheme members as much as we can that we are going to get there. We are going to get to those cases. But I couldn't give you an answer on that particular question, I'm afraid. I'm sorry.
Yeah, like, I think the question came out of concern for the fact I imagine your job becomes a lot harder the more cases in the backlog as that grows. So I think it's just around that. And, yeah.
I mean, essentially, Victor, they've got to go through 10 years worth of data And then out of that 10 years worth of data, if we multiply it up, out of 100,000 people, there's likely to be, if it turns out the same, roughly 300 cases who will get some benefit, but the benefit is likely to be very small. Maggie.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. So as a new member, I'm assuming there was no new burdens, grants or payments to compensate for the administration on the work you've had to do? No?
No, there wasn't, no.
Very good idea, Maggie, but no, unfortunately not. Hilary.
Thank you. I think the other worry we have as members here is the pressure on the existing staff. And when new staff come and join us, hooray, but they've still got to catch up and know what they're doing. So this has been going on for some months. It's likely to go on for some more months. So I think with the KPIs, I think what we've got to concentrate is the welfare of the staff. And people cannot keep going overtime, grinding through really quite monotonous work, that we have to be careful of that. And at the end of the day, I'd rather, with the explanations, be aware of the KPIs, but if that is what we pay for to ensure our staff are considered and their welfare is taken into account, then that's a burden. It's not we didn't instigate this. This is something we have to do with less funding and still carry on with your normal work. So KPIs, but people get hung up on KPIs, and there's always a background, and that's what I'm more worried about.
Thank you, Hilary. I think it is very different. It's not as though you can just run a simple computer program, because every case is absolutely unique. So a huge amount of work, but you can now see why I said it was very dear to Ian's heart. I don't think he'd like to turn back time. So, look, if there are no other questions, the committee's been asked to note all areas of the report. Is that agreed? Agreed, thank you. So we now come to item 11, which is a summary evaluation of the Pension Fund Investment Report on pages 97 to 116. Bhulesh Karcher, Senior Financial Analyst in Investments, is presenting the report. So over to you, Bhulesh.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, members. So this is our standard quarterly update on the performance of the pension fund, with a bit of market performance and outlook thrown in. The report also provides progress on the listed equity changes, which were approved by the Investment Subcommittee in April 2023. There was an update on progress provided to the Investment Subcommittee in October 23 and to the Local Pension Committee on the 8th of March, so we'll build on that. Onto the market performance and outlook, which are the from points 3 onwards. The first quarter of 2024 was one of the strongest for global equity since 2019, plus 8% in the quarter alone. LGPS Central, along with most other commentators, note that the future trajectory of global interest rates remain of importance to investors, given many portfolios, including our own, contains a material weight to listed equity, and all other things being equal, the prospects of lowering rates would be a tailwind to equities, as demonstrated by the 2024 Q1 rally. On the flip side, however, inflation has proved to be stickier than expected, and as such, the number of interest rate cuts in 2024 has decreased significantly from the start of this year. And with that backdrop, it's rather surprising that listed equities performed so well. Hymans, our investment advisor, do believe that whilst UK headline CPI is falling, underlying price pressures may give central bankers the opportunity to pause before cutting rates. You've got a graph there just underneath point 4, which is the Hymans forecast for CPI. You can see the horizontal lines, the 2% Bank of England target. It cuts off around February. It's now at 2% exactly, as at this morning, and that's the May reading. Over to point 6, Hymans do believe that global equity valuations do remain elevated in some regions, and you've got this this graph below 0.6, which kind of shows the four major investing regions through the world. So you've got the US, the UK, Europe, excluding UK, and emerging markets, which is EM. And the little graph's trying to show that if you look at where the diamond is on each one, it shows the relative valuation of equities over a long period of time since April 1998. And what you can see there is US valuations really high, so therefore it would imply that US stocks are expensive. UK, it's bang in the middle, in the median, so it's suggesting that UK shares are of fair price, and EM shares, emerging market shares, are fairly cheap. What it's trying to say to you is that, you know, it could be a period of time where listed equity is quite expensive. Given we hold quite a fair amount of listed equity exposure, it's worth bringing that point to the committee's attention. It also must be understood that, you know, the price earnings valuations are just one of many metrics that can be used to value a company, and these can stay elevated or, you know, lower than norm for long periods of time. Another point to bring out from that Hyman's report is a property section. Their report is appended to this report, and the property section essentially shows that net initial yields for UK property are probably the highest they've been for nearly 10 years. The graph at the top of page 99 kind of demonstrates that. You can see we've got about a 6.5% net initial yield. And the last time we were able to buy property at that kind of yield was about 2014. At point 8, we've got the usual table of summary of global asset class performances over various time frames. We've probably seen this over and over again over the last few years now. Just one asset class remains at double digit at the minute now. Over 20 years, that is. And the final one to take from that Hyman's report is the table that you can see at the top of page 100. Again, this is a price earnings ratio graph that shows the current level of expensiveness of shares, if you like, which is that horizontal bar. It's around 24. And it says here that if you have this kind of valuation for shares, that go forward, your return should be about anywhere between that range there, which is about 5 to 12%. So we're not looking for the highest returns anymore if you know, history repeats. The last point here is point 12, to be noted that the fund's assets have grown considerably over the past few years as a combination of being cash flow positive, i.e. we're paying out fewer pensions than we're taking in contributions, and positive investment returns. The markets over the past 3 to 5 years have been largely supportive. However, poorer periods of performance can occur and can last for many years. And just for reference there, the fund as at March 2020, so about 4 years ago, was valued at about 4.2 billion. 4 years later, March 2024, 6.3 billion. That's a full 50% bigger. Before I carry on to portfolio changes, any questions at that point?
So, thanks very much. Has anyone got any questions or queries? No? Okay. No? All right, carry on with us.
Portfolio changes in the quarter ended to March 2024 are in this table at point 13. There's 6 changes highlighted there. I'll run through them very quickly. Aspect and Pictet, part of our targeted return portfolio, were finally divested in January 2024, so final redemption units resulting in about £100 million worth of cash back to the fund. Fulcrum, which was one of the new targeted return managers, added to in March 2024, 30 million. The Central Direct Property Fund called 21 million. The Central Infrastructure Fund called another 17, and Central's Multi-Asset Credit Fund in March and February, over 2 separate investments, we added 120 million to that fund. The net effect on cash during the quarter has been a small reduction as a result of all those changes, from 421 at the end of 2023 to 386 as at 31st of March 2024. The next few points here talk about our listed equity reorganisation. I'll run through, for the benefit of our newer members here, what we did. the decision was taken to reorganize the listed equity holdings. So these are the 3 equity funds that we hold with LGPS Central, and a list of passive equity funds that we hold with Legal & General. We, or at least the subcommittee, agreed to reduce the total weight to 37.5% of total assets, appoint a transition advisor, and then we described the 4-phase plan to reorganise towards that 37.5% target. Phase 1 of that plan was completed in September last year. £220 million was released back to the fund in cash, and that reduced the central multi-factor fund down to its target weight of 12%. Second phase was the reorganisation of our many LGIM passive holdings, effectively simplifying that structure down to just 3 holdings. Phases 3 and 4, which are the divestment of the Central Emerging Market Fund in total and investment into the Central Global Equity Fund, are being planned to coincide with the appointment of a 4th manager that Central wanted to appoint to the Global Equity Fund. And that's now been agreed, so there is a 4th manager lined up, and we're going to line up as a fund to invest into that fund when the reorganisation takes place. Over to page 103 and point 24, we've made relevant commitments to the underlying managers, which are in the process of being called. This is a reference to the amount of cash we're holding on the fund at the minute. In total, there are commitments totaling 600 million waiting to be called. In addition, the fund has approval to commit a further 360 million in 2024 across private equity and private debt asset classes. We're just waiting on the relevant products to be launched, and then those documents can be signed. Over 2023-24, the relatively large amount of cash has been held in a mixture of money market funds, which is readily available to the fund, and fixed deposits. Given the higher cash holdings, a cash management strategy was presented to the committee in October 2023, which formalised the limits and the types of institutions the fund could hold. A cash flow forecast for the fund estimates that cash should reduce gradually over the calendar year towards 200 million. Much of the reduction will come from planned investments to the LGPS Central's multi-asset credit fund, where an additional 180 million is planned to be invested on top of the 120 I just talked about earlier. Point 28 talks to the table, which is overleaf on page 104, and it shows where we're overweight and underweight across the various asset classes. So if you look at the 6th column across, that's the difference to the target weight. So what we're really showing here is that we're overweight in the growth part, which is the listed equity target return and the private equity together to about 250 million over. And then that next block there, which is the income block there, we're about 600 million short of target. And then finally, we've got that cash block right at the bottom. So it's going to take a bit of time to realign that. Although we could take away all the overweight to the growth part, we'd just be sitting on more and more cash. Really, we're trying to manage the calls that come from the managers within that income block, so we don't run a huge amount of cash. Any questions at that point before I go to investment performance?
So, Nick.
Just quick, going back to the previous bit, you talk about emerging market assets being cheap. Is that supposedly on that metrics question mark? Is that because of the Chinese market, in which case maybe the market, Mr. Market's right?
It'll certainly be part of that. China being a big weight to emerging markets, but it'll be the markets as well. We did have a listed equity review. We review annually with Hymans, as you know. We bring to the January committee where our strategic allocation should be. Yeah, you're right. It could be proved right, but it's just one of many metrics. Yeah.
Okay, so no other questions. So if you carry on, Bullet.
Overall investment performance is included and appended to the report as a private report. We've got a summary within here. Hymans Robertson collect our information direct from the managers and calculate performance. It's just worth pointing out here that for the first quarter this year, and we'll be doing this as we go through, we've made a few changes to the benchmarks that we compare our actual performance to. Point 31 talks about, we've got 3 there that we've amended this quarter, and we'll do a few more next quarter and a few more next quarter after that. So we've kind of made it in general a little bit harder, I think, on the fund to compare against. So you can see here that the LGPS Central Climate Multi-Factor Fund used to be compared to a pretty much a proxy of what it was investing in. What we've now done is we've compared it to the FTSE All World. So we should be trying to beat the FTSE All World plus get a carbon benefit, if you like. The second one is all our private equity funds. That includes the Central funds and the Adam Street funds and the Aberdeen fund, are now going to be compared to not just the FTSE All World Index, but FTSE All World plus a premium of 3%. And our infrastructure funds, so that's the JP Morgan fund, the IFM funds, we'll talk more about these funds later, won't just be compared to a cash plus 4, it's going to be compared to an absolute target of 8% per annum. And all of these new benchmarks were agreed at the meeting of the Local Pension Committee in January 2024. Point 32 looks at our funds returns over various timeframes: quarter, 1 year, 3 year per annum, and 5 year. Over the longer term, you can see there the 3 and 5 are at 6.6 and 7%, both ahead of their benchmarks. We'll talk about the 8.9 in the 1 year being minus 2.5 to the benchmark. That 1 year underperformance versus the benchmark of 2.5% is mainly driven by the growth in income asset groups. The change in the private equity benchmark, FTSE All World to FTSE All World plus 3, will make the attainment a bit harder. The targeted return holdings, so that would have been Aspect, Pictet, Ruffer and Fulcrum now, have also lagged the benchmark over the 1 year by 3.4%, largely due to returns at Ruffer not matching the benchmark. The positive interest rate environment during 23-24 has meant that the benchmark just for those alone would have been 9.1%. So that cash plus the 4 would have been 9.1. Over the longer time period, though, targeted return has performed well, outperforming both the 3 and 5 year periods. What you've got then is a breakdown. We've got a long history of investing in private credit. Point 37 and 38 talks to the investments we've made since 2014 in this space. The table at the top of page 106, the only item worth probably picking out from all of those investments there is the 2016 vintage, where the returns are likely to be subpar. So you can see there that the net return there since inception is 3%. At present, the fund also has 410 million invested in private credit across these 2 managers, so it's just the 2. So all those MAC funds there are 1 manager, that's Partners Group, and LGPS Central are the 3 in the second block down, so the low return fund, the high return fund and the real asset fund. At present, there's still 200 million to be called by LGPS Central across those 3 funds. And we're working with Central at the minute to launch the new iterations of those funds in 2024. So there will be a low return fund and a real asset fund. I think that's pretty much all I've got to say there on performance, unless there's any questions from anyone.
Okay, thanks very much, Bulash. That's a pretty comprehensive update. Nick?
The 1 year benchmark 2.5% below benchmark, although the actual figures 8.9 looks very healthy. Is any of that to do with sort of private equity not actually being revalued in time, or is that a real loss?
No, you're right. So that underperformance is driven by the growth asset class, and within that, private equities performance is lower, decidedly so, in fact. And you're right, it is about the lag in valuations. So yeah, they don't revalue very often. They kind of lead and lag. So what you'll find is, as listed markets have moved up really rapidly in this first quarter, private equity valuations won't have caught up for a while. And quite the opposite the other way around. So you'll remember the previous year, listed equity fell away quite markedly in 2022 and early 2023. Private equity stayed high. So there was a period of time where private equity looked really good, but it's a consequence of not being able to value those companies regularly enough, like the public markets do every day.
Good point, Nick. Good point. Any other questions?
One here.
Yep, James.
Thank you, Chair. It's jumping back, apologies, to paragraph 25, which was talking about the significant cash holdings. And I took an action on myself to kind of go back. It's reassuring to see that approach was reviewed. I think it was in October 23. But just one question now. It talks about the final sentence that we've got a maximum term for deposits of 1 year. Just a question on that in a potentially a falling interest rate environment. Was there any consideration to longer term investments to manage cash flow? So just support process around that.
You're right. The longest we'd fix out for is a year. Our current policy doesn't allow us to go beyond a year, and it kind of mimics our county council policy. So we use a similar framework, similar advisor. I was just going to look over to Declan and say if there was any views at county level to extend.
I mean, when we looked at it in the past, the sort of premium for 2 years over 1 year wasn't that significant. We've always sort of kept that sort of flexibility. And I think partly it's always the pension fund that, I suppose, in contrast to the county council, we don't really want to be holding this level of cash. So the hope is over the course of a year that would have eroded that sort of cash pile anyway. But no, it's something we look at occasionally, but it hasn't been worthwhile, the sort of the sacrifice and flexibility in the past.
Thanks, Declan. Okay, any other questions? No? So the committee has been asked to note the report. Is that agreed? Yeah, thank you. The next is the item 12 is action agreed by the investment subcommittee, 117 to 122. We've been asked to take this report as read unless there are any questions. Is the committee happy to do that? Yeah. Okay, so that's agreed. We've noted that report and agreed it. The next item is the training policy review. So, Kat, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. So this report follows a review of the training policy after the training needs assessment that came to committee in January. So the training policy was last approved in March 2022, and the policy reflects the importance of training given the distinction of fiduciary duty owed to the fund, the complexity of pensions landscape, changing membership, as well as the fund being treated as a professional client by investment managers, and the requirement to comply with the Markets in Financial Instruments Directive, among others. While a training policy for the fund and reporting against it is not a current requirement in regulation, it is the direction of travel that training requirements will be established. Therefore, the fund is following the Good Governance Review by the Scheme Advisory Board and the new General Code of Practice, as well as best practice seen within other funds. It's worth saying that officers are aware of the pressures on members. So we don't want to set unreasonable standards which create difficulties for members serving on the committee or board, and individuals are not expected to become technical experts, and levels of knowledge will vary depending on experience. And we recognise that some members have been on the committee or board for a number of years, so have over time built up that good knowledge and experience. However, ultimately, members and the fund does need to demonstrate that committee and board possess the expertise, experience and knowledge required to be capable of serving on the committee and board. And for committee especially, members have to satisfy those providing investment services that it also possesses those requirements to be capable of making its own investment decisions, understands the risk involved, and undertaking training as required is an accepted way to provide such assurance. So in reviewing the policy, we considered the views of committee and board, so views of the committee expressed in January, and then we also took the draft training policy to board in April. So we started putting on in-person Hyman's training sessions, which are being kept under review. And we're also looking at how we can initially communicate with future representatives on committee or board about the expectations and time commitments and any training requirements subject to approval of the revised training policy. So just to flag, I suppose, some of the key changes in the policy. This now sets out the differentiation between training expectations on committee, board and officers, and sets a requirement. So probably the biggest change is it sets a requirement that those involved in the fund must complete the online Hyman's training within 6 months of appointments or upon any revision of the modules. The policy also sets out how we can report on a successful training policy and the criteria within that, so how the fund is going to report as part of the annual fund report, as well as how we kind of talk to committee chairs about training being undertaken, progress made by members. The policy also goes into detail on the flexibility of training and kind of the different methods that we can utilise. As mentioned, we've held 2 in-person training sessions so far, with 2 more scheduled this year. The revised plan is set out in Appendix B, and we've amended some of those modules covered, so we don't exceed those 2-hour sessions following comments by members. And we're saying that members that are unable to attend these in-person sessions should complete these modules in their own time by the end of the relevant month to coincide with that 6-month completion timeframe. Subject to approval of the policy, we'll start reporting to the chairman on members' completion records, and we'll go ahead with how we can report it in future annual reports further to what is already within those. So take any questions.
Thank you, Kat. Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you, Chair. A difficult one, really, because I'm encouraged and delighted by the progress that's been made in this area, and it is quite significant, and we should recognise that fact. But we should also recognise the fact that what was alluded to in the beginning is that actually isn't mandatory, although we might wish to make that mandatory within our own rules and regulations, different subject altogether. My difficulty here is this within 6 months, simply because whilst everybody does their level best to attend these things, it's not always going to be reasonably practical to do so. And I know you can do it online separately outside of the meetings, but not everybody's going to equally have access to be able to do that. I remember a previous member who remained nameless, but did say they were struggling with that element of it. So in recognising that members have a life outside of this committee, they have other commitments, they have potentially technical difficulties in getting online. I'm disappointed in the 6-month element, providing people have demonstrated reasonableness and the word reasonableness in law is quite difficult to define. As I say, great progress is being made, and I'm encouraged by that, and we should all be encouraged by that, Chair. But I am a tad disappointed about the 6-month time span being put on people, given that we don't live in a perfect world, Chair.
Thanks for those comments. I think it is difficult. We really do need to. It is basic training. I'm sure that if anybody has any problem getting online or with the training, that officers would help them. But coming to the committee and not having had the training really isn't helpful. I think it's incumbent upon members of the committee to actually train themselves up. I really do. And 6 months for me doesn't seem unreasonable. But Kat, have you got any comments?
No, just I suppose to reiterate, if any members are having technical issues, happy to go through that with members. And that is 6 months. I suppose we do need to show at what point like the criteria is being fulfilled, because I think at the moment we've just been reporting on training, but not necessarily against how well that is kind of succeeding with the training policy. So I suppose in future we will look at how it's working for members and if changes need to be made. But I think we always have that flexibility, which is why we have the in-person sessions, which I think hopefully members have been finding useful, and also always happy to speak outside if members are having specific issues with any.
Thanks very much. Any other questions or comments? Hilary?
Well, I agree with the chairman's remarks and also with Kat. I think it is beholden us if we sit on this committee and nobody is holding our arms behind our back and saying, you've got to sit on this committee. I chose to. I subbed on it for a number of meetings, then decided, yes, I would like to be a full-time member. I attend the meetings. I have had occasionally the training. I have occasionally altered other appointments. But I think it is beholden on, and I think 6 months. This is a complicated, probably one of the most complicated committees you can sit on, and requires quite a lot of reading and dedication. Not all the 1,000 pages, but never mind, we do our best. But I do think 6 months is more than enough time to do it, training. And I think it is vital that it is done before you start attending these regular meetings. You have 2 more sessions this year, and they're already in my diary, and I have had to alter an appointment. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Any other questions or comments? No. So the committee has been asked to approve the proposed changes to the training policy. I'm happy to recommend it. Can I have a seconder? Thank you. And all those in favour? Okay, that's agreed. That's agreed. Sorry. Okay, that's fine. LGPS Central is, as I understand it, they're due at 11 o'clock, is that right? So, sorry. Yeah, can we go, if committee is happy, this one, yeah. We'll do item 14. So agenda item 14 is the investment subcommittee. So we've done that already, haven't we? Asked to report membership. We've agreed that. Yeah, have we? Yeah, that's fine. So that's agreed. Okay. So the item 15 is the LGPS Central. Do we have a short adjournment? Yeah. So if we're back here at say 1:15, it's fine. Yeah. Okay. So we'll have a slight adjournment while we wait for LGPS Central. And the next item is agenda item 15, which is an LGPS Central update. So we've got with us this morning Richard Deeks, Nadeem Hussain, Mrs. Anushka Ramsey and Miss Susan Martin from LGPS Central, who will deliver a presentation on this item after Bulesh is just doing a short introduction.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be as brief as I can. So, purpose is to provide the committee with an update on the fund's investment with LGPS Central. A presentation will be delivered by LGPS Central. It will cover the pooling landscape, a people update, central investments, including the fund's investments, a responsible investment overview, and a performance of public and private markets. I'll rattle through the kind of background for our newer members here today. Central is an investment management company. It's owned by its 8 Midlands-based local government pension scheme funds. Started in 2018. The fund is a stakeholder from 2 perspectives. It's a co-owner and a shareholder, so a 1/8 share, and it's also a recipient of investment services. The fund's invested, as at the 31st of March, 2.5 billion in assets with LGPS Central, and we also have 1.1 billion in collectively procured low cost passive funds with with Legal & General rather. On point 6 overleaf, we've got the funds that we are invested in with LGPS Central, and we will get presented on those in a moment. That's all.
Okay, so over to the LGPS Central team.
Thank you. And first thing, let me introduce myself. My name is Richard Law-Deeks. This is week 2 for me at LGPS Central. I've joined from Royal Mail Pension Plan, but the LGPS isn't new to me. It's actually where I started my career, so it's really nice to be back working with the LGPS. I think you've already introduced my colleagues, but we've got Susan Martin, who's a Senior Non-Executive Director of Central, Anushka Ramsey, who's our newish Chief People Officer, and Nadeem Hussain, who's our Head of Private Markets. The second thing I wanted to say is just thank you for entrusting us with the safeguarding of your assets. Leicestershire is a really important partner fund for us. It's even part of our DNA. One of the first people I interacted with was Colin Pratt, who I understand came from Leicestershire, so I'm really glad that we've got people who've come over from the partner fund at Central. For me personally, Leicestershire will also be really special forevermore because this is my first pensions committee and the first partner fund I've come out to visit. So it will be a historic day for me, whatever happens. I've got a few slides and I wasn't going to talk through them specifically, but I think, generally this is a really interesting time to be joining Central. I wasn't able to make it to the all parties meeting on the 3rd of June, but there's a real positive energy at Central now around that. The team is mobilising to deliver the change around pace, collaboration and communications, and there's a real positive energy. The other thing that's really exciting is we've got a new leadership team. There's a lot of change at the senior level. We've got Anushka here today, but she's already making a really positive impact on the culture and the people agenda. The other thing that was really, really interesting for me to join was the RI Summit. So I opened that. That was a really good event. I've been really impressed with across the organisation, the commitment to responsible investment. I know that's really important for Leicestershire, so it's really nice to be joining an organisation where that's a top priority. And last but not least, we're a few weeks away from a general election. Whatever the outcome, it seems like any new government is going to be looking for domestic institutional investors to support the kind of growth agenda. There's lots of stuff in the press in the pensions press specifically about mergers. So it's just a very interesting time and we'll be expecting some change, but let's wait and see what happens. It's very early days for me. I'm very much in listening mode and I've got some time with officers and I think Councillor Barclay later where hopefully we can talk a little bit more. There's lots to do. I can't wait to get stuck in, but that was all I was going to say. I'm sure we'll have time for any questions later on.
That's fine. So does any other do any of the others want to say anything? Or
I was going to ask if Susan wants to say anything.
Thank you very much. See, I've forgotten that already. Absolutely. So yes, thank you for the introductions. And like Richard, as Bulesh knows, Leicestershire has a special place in my heart because it's my home county and my university town. So I'm always delighted for an opportunity to come to Leicestershire and to see how we're doing as Leicestershire, but also how we're doing linked into Central. And as Richard has said, Leicestershire is a really key client for us, given the commitments that you have made to us over the years. And we always welcome your support and your challenge. So this last year, if I look back, has been quite a tough year for the company. We thank John, our interim CEO, who's now stepped back into his previous role. We thank him for holding the fort, and Joanne, our chair, for holding the fort so ably, as well as the team. Our colleagues have worked incredibly hard this year to achieve for our clients, and I'm really proud of them all. What we've got now is a new leadership team under Richard, and we've spent a lot of time as a board ensuring that we appoint people who have a commitment to what we're doing with pooling and who share our values, because without shared values, we're not going to get the performance that you require. And without that commitment to your members and your employers, we're not going to deliver for you. So for me as a board member, I'm delighted to welcome Richard, Anushka and Trevor working alongside Struan and John. I think you're going to see the organisation moving forward with a pace. We had an excellent meeting with partner funds earlier this month, really great working together with everybody and a lot of learning from everybody from that. And I can see us moving forward together. So I'm delighted to be here and delighted to see the leadership team today. So thank you.
Thank you, Susan. It's any questions or queries from any members? No. So, Bulesh, did you want to say anything else? No. No, we're going to go to you, Richard, now then for your present. Oh, Anushka. Anushka, carry on.
Thank you. So if I can ask for the slides on the people strategy. Oh, we're up. I can't see behind me at the moment. So slide, if we could move on to the people strategy slide, unless you wanted to cover the overall picture, Richard, at this stage.
No, I think.
Thank you. So I think we're moving on a couple of slides. Wonderful. Thank you. That's great. So, so yes, thank you for the introduction. I'm Anushka Ramsey. I'm the Chief People Officer here at Central. And like Richard, I'm now counting in months rather than weeks. So this is month 3 for me as I get to know the organisation. And as both Susan and Richard have said, this is a very exciting time, I think, for the next phase of Central's journey and ambitions. At the heart of everything that we do as an organisation is, of course, the assets that we manage, but it's the people and the talent that make that come together. And ensuring that we have the best talent to support the organisation and its ambitions is absolutely crucial. As part of that, there have been 2 change agendas, if you like, from a people perspective. The first is around the evolution of our culture and refreshing our values and who we are as an organisation, and putting those behaviours at the heart of our ambitions to move forward. And you know, one of our values, as you can see from the slides that we're presenting, is around trust and transparency. So in true trust and transparency perspective, we want to demonstrate as much about what's going on within the organisation as possible, and for you to be in a position to help us understand if we are indeed living the values that we are suggesting we live by. So there is a programme of work. We launched them back in April this year, just as I was joining. And we're now embedding the values in all parts of the organisation throughout the employee life cycle, whether that be in our reward and recognition programmes, our performance management, and in our way that peer-to-peer people can offer each other recognition as well. So we'll be delighted to hear how you can see the organisation changing as this evolves over the course of the forthcoming months. So culture very much at the heart of everything we do, and as a leadership team, we're entirely committed to ensuring that shapes and develops in the right direction. The second part, if I can ask for the next slide, please, is our people strategy. And I believe last year there was some turbulence within Central in terms of obviously changes in the leadership team, but also changes in key members of staff. We're committed to making sure that that position stabilises, and I'm delighted to say that we're in a much better position now. And that gives us now the foundations to really think about how we shape up Central as a destination for talent in the West Midlands. Our people strategy is based around 4 pillars: belonging, growing, performing and rewarding. And underneath those pillars are various activities to help us strengthen our people agenda and to ensure that we're doing things not just to support incoming talent, but to develop the talent that's in the organisation already. I was delighted by one of the statistics that I uncovered, which says 45% of the internal mobility of the organisation is from talent within, growing and developing to support the growth of Central and as professionals within the organisation. So I thought that was a very encouraging picture. We've got a very strong focus at the moment around wellbeing and ensuring that we're doing things to support the wellbeing of our colleagues, which has been perhaps a bit of a shift forward from COVID, where it's been about physical well-being in its entirety, but really about ensuring that this is a great place to enjoy a career and the flexible working options that we've got on offer. We're very open to dialogue around this and to sharing best practice. So as we grow from a people strategy perspective, very keen to see opportunities for us to do things as a collaboration as well. So the door is open to ideas from that point of view. I will conclude on that basis on the people strategy unless there's any questions.
Thank you, Lucia. So yes, please, Maggie.
Yeah, thank you. Just about managing that churn, because you've obviously had a lot of churn, a lot of change. You've got 45% internal promotion and everything. So it's how you're. I'm just interested to see how you're managing that. You're saying you're putting different things in your ambition, blah, 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 blah. But how are you actually managing that change and bringing those people that you've already got along with you in the development?
I think that's a really great question. So I think the stabilisation generally. So what we did see last year was a trend that was quite similar to everything that was going on in the UK in terms of the Great Resignation. It was when you look at the industry and global situation, our peak was following exactly the same trend. So I'd like to think that that gives us some reassurance it's not just a central thing. But key for us really is about setting a vision and ambition. And at the heart of that is ensuring that we've got strong collaborations and partnerships and an understanding of the future of pooling. So for us as a leadership team, I think it's giving our colleagues real reassurance that this is a destination environment for them and that they can grow with confidence. So the more, I guess, collaboration and confidence that you have in us as a partner fund, the greater sense of confidence I believe our colleagues get in the future of the organisation. In terms of then, how do we ensure that they stick with us? There are a number of different things, and it's I think key now from a people point of view is one size doesn't fit all to retain people. Some people are at work for career development, some are for flexibility, some are for learning and development, and we're ensuring that everything that we do has a very personalised perspective and upskilling our people managers to ensure that they're at the heart of ensuring that that's delivered for them.
Thank you, Anushka. Yes, please. All right. Did you? No. Okay, so if there are no other questions, we will move on to Nadine.
Thank you very much. And echo what my colleagues have said here. Really delighted to be here. I feel as though I'm the old person here, even though I've only been in the firm for
You're not,
years and enjoyed during but again, thank you. So turning to slide 11, which is a brief overview of our investment journey so far. And when I stepped back and looked at this slide for the first time, I was thinking in 2021 we did 11, and in the other years it seems like we've switched off, but that's certainly not the case. A lot of the funds that we develop do take a number of months and maybe even years to make sure that we develop the right products for our clients. We've worked together with Bullesh and the team and here at Leicestershire, and not only Leicestershire but our other partner funds to give a broad suite of products. So since the firm started back in 2018. You'll see here we've launched 28 funds, really to give our partner funds a broad suite of products that they can invest in with confidence with us, and delighted to say that, you know, Leicestershire are in 14 of those, and those are marked by the green writing on those slides. But the sort of hard work doesn't stop there. We are working and hopefully working with pace to deliver additional products for our partner funds. And you'll see in 2024 where we're working to launch 5 additional products. Now this may seem, oh wow, what you know, 5 additional products. You've got 28 already. Do you need an additional 5? But a lot of these are in addition to existing vintages that we've had that are now closed. So it's not necessarily additional products. On slide 12, we've given a brief overview and sort of thank you all for your support in terms of helping Pooling and LGPS Central grow. Delighted to say that 40% of the assets of Leicestershire are now pooled. This obviously doesn't include what is hopefully in the pipeline, touch wood, if they get approved. And that's including the 2 additional vintages that I mentioned earlier in terms of private credit, which we've hopefully now presented a business case to partner funds, and that should be in development over the summer. And the anticipated launch of those is September this year. Including those, that pooling number does increase to 43%, and the one sort of elephant in the room is the LGIM passive assets, which were obviously designed in advance of LGPS Central being set up. So that is kind of a pool product, but it's one where I guess if you take a different approach than those are, that would certainly increase the amount that has been pooled. On slide 13, this table gives, there's a lot of information here, but this table does give an overview of the funds that Leicestershire have invested in. As mentioned, these are the 14 funds which Leicestershire have committed to over time. To begin with, the Global Equity Multi-Manager Fund. So this is one of our oldest funds that we've had. I think it's safe to say that this is one that we are particularly proud of. Now, whilst the colour there shows amber, and amber basically indicates that it's ahead of benchmark but slightly behind target. So it is one of the highest performing funds that we have, and actually if you compare it to the market, and a market of 1,200 similar strategy funds and an external outfit which categorizes these and benchmarks these, it is a top quartile performing fund. It's ahead of benchmark by 118 basis points, and as a reminder, that benchmark is a FTSE All World benchmark plus a 1.5% target. When I mentioned earlier that it's marginally behind benchmark, it's 32 basis points, so we're hoping that is something that will recover. As a reminder, there's 3 managers that we have here. So Schroders and Union, they're both beating the benchmark, and Harris, which has a slightly different strategy in that they're more of a value manager. They are going to make up that sort of difference, but hopefully value is something that as a strategy which should come through over the long term. The one fund which is underperforming, and we have spoken to you before about this, is really the Emerging Markets Fund, and this is 79 basis points behind benchmark. And one of the things in hindsight that we perhaps could have done more is encourage our managers to put more in India. India as a benchmark has overperformed, and as a result, we are slightly underweight India, which has made that fund perform below its benchmark. The other 4 that follow are our fixed income strategies. The first one there is the Emerging Market Bond Fund. Pleased to say that that's ahead of benchmark, also ahead of target, as demonstrated by the green colour. The corporate investment grade multi-manager fund, again, that's ahead of benchmark, but only 21 basis points behind target. So it's not, I mean, it is behind target. Those are facts, but actually it's very, very marginal once again. The MAC fund, so as you may be aware, and as it's shown in this table here, it's a fund that was set up back in 2019, and one that perhaps we were we set a benchmark which was a cash plus benchmark, and given where the macro environment has been over the last couple of years, that has impacted where that fund has performed. Now, we're undertaking a 3-year review and looking at the guidelines and potentially restructuring that fund as that fund approaches the 3 years to see where we can adjust that fund in terms of the managers that we selected to ensure that makes a recovery. And finally, you'll see here a lot of Leicestershire's assets are in our multi-factor passive funds, and that trades both above benchmark. It doesn't have a target, but it's above benchmark. Then coming on to private markets, which is my area. The slight nuance in private markets is it's slightly different in that capital, whilst we commit capital, it's not drawn straight away. So whereas in the public markets, you commit capital to a manager and it's invested, it's there in day one. So the difference in private markets is we commit capital and that's drawn normally over an investment period, and depending whether it's private credit, private equity or infrastructure, that can be anywhere between 3 and 5 years. So the performance is likely to be volatile in those periods, because actually these are not day-to-day marketed prices. They are quarterly valuations and normally book valuations as opposed to traded prices in the public markets. Touching on a couple of these, when I mentioned earlier in terms of that performance coming through, the earlier vintage in terms of private credit is private equity is an indication of how that performance will develop over time. So our private equity vintages are a 2018 vintage, which Leicestershire were in. As you can see here, that is performing particularly well at a 13.4% return, and against a benchmark of a FTSE All Share plus 4%. It's well ahead of that benchmark, and this is the sort of thing that you do see in private markets, in that performance will come over time, but because capital is deployed and that takes longer to deploy, the performance is not always seen in earlier years. Private credit, I'll touch on the first 3 funds that we have there. It's safe to say that private credit as an industry has grown over the last couple of years, and really on the back of one, bank retrenchment, because banks have additional capital requirements, so they don't wish to make lending as much as they used to do. So a lot of the private institutions are taking advantage of that market now. That industry has grown quite considerably, and we're seeing that especially with our funds, which are still in deployment phase. So as shown in the column called drawn, they are still drawing capital. They're 60%, 55 and 48% drawn, so they've still got a bit of way to go. But we are seeing that performance number come through as those loans are made to the underlying companies and that yield starts coming through immediately. I know we're going to go into infrastructure a bit later on, but infrastructure, again, it's a long-term asset class. It's capital that gets deployed over a number of years. As we know, it takes a number of years to produce infrastructure assets, so that performance we should start seeing over time. Going on to slide 14 now. This gives you a brief overview in terms of the funds that we're looking to develop this year and are part of our business plan that we've been discussing with our partner funds. So the first one is a buy and maintain fund in fixed income. We're expecting to, I know it says here Q2, but we've been working with our partner funds to make sure that that strategy is right, the benchmarks are right, such that it's appropriate for our partner funds under the current macro environment, and hopefully that should be one where we launch in August this year. We've already gone through the process of trying to procure a manager, and hopefully that'll be one that we can announce to partner funds in the coming weeks. Private credit, as I mentioned, we're doing 2 additional private credit vintages this year, which is the direct lending sleeve and also the real asset sleeve. And real assets is infrastructure debt and real estate debt. And finally, the open-ended infrastructure funds. The infrastructure funds are open-ended, and that leans to the asset class being a long-term asset class. So partner funds can make allocations on a regular basis as opposed to waiting a couple of years for vintages. On slide 15, I'll go into our responsible investment integrated status. This is embedded in everything that we do. Everything from selection all the way to appointing a manager and then ongoing monitoring across public markets, but also private markets. The RI team, which I know they've come and presented to councillors here before. They are very integrated. I think they're probably our largest team in terms of within Central as an individual team. So actually, it shows how sort of serious we take RI and make sure that it's appropriately resourced. During the selection stage, in public markets, they're involved in the initial SQ stage, which is the procurement process that we go through. So involved in the SQ stage, they're involved in the RFP stage, and also form an independent view on the managers when we look to appoint managers and benchmarking them with each other. And then finally, on the ongoing monitoring, it doesn't stop there. Once we invest in a manager, we look to regularly monitor the RI status of each manager that we invest in. Slide 16 gives a quick example of the ESG integrated status, and this slide picks out Harris as a manager and also the investment thesis for investing into Glencore. The questions that we go back to Glencore on as a manager is really based on both the environmental aspects, the social aspects, and the governance aspects, and really trying to understand why they remain active in fossil fuel production. This is a report that they've issued to us. So 20% of their business remains in fossil fuels, but actually 80% is in opportunities that are that present environmentally positive outcomes. So it's engaging with those managers regularly to ascertain whether those are individual positions that they should keep. And that engagement is done on a regular basis. Turning to slide 17. Slide 17 gives you an overview of the selection process that we apply both in public and private markets, and it looks at a 5-pillar approach: people, policy, processes, performance, transparency, and collaboration. Now, the RI team will always do an independent review, so we as the investment team will have no influence per se on what their outcome is and what their score is on each manager. And if their score is presented to our investment committee, and more often than not, that is a reason why we may not proceed with a particular manager if their scores are not up to scratch. So again, it's pointing towards how serious we take the RI integrated status. Slide 18. Slide 18 very quickly. We do obviously the scoring at the initial selection stage, but we also do regular reviews on managers both in public and private. The chart here, the spider chart, it gives you a brief sort of overview, and it's something that we regularly report in our quarterly reports on how the scoring of a potential manager has changed. So if, for example, we have made them recommendations on improving their ESG reporting or ensuring that there's an RI representative on their investment committees, it's something that we will revisit to ensure that it is being addressed. And in the event it isn't, it will be another recommendation that we make to managers. Turning to slide 19. The stewardship team look at a number of themes across each of the managers that we look after. That includes climate. So, how are they reporting on their net zero alignment? Is it something that they report on a regular basis? Are they meeting the targets that they set out to do? So it'll be something that we continuously challenge. We'll also look at their approach to natural capital. How are they ensuring that they're using the right resources? We'll look at other things such as human rights. So where are they sourcing particular materials from? Is it from a particular country which may be known to use, for example, child labour? And we'll look to try and ensure that managers don't go down those routes. And other things that we look at is their approach to fair tax, for example. On slide 20, this gives a quick overview in terms of the additional things that the team are looking at within RI. So one of the things that they're looking to prioritise for 2024 is understanding the risk appetite and strategies of those managers in more detail. There's a lot of managers that we have and a lot of underlying positions that they have. So we want to ensure that there's consistent reporting across each of those managers. We're always looking to evolve, and it's safe to say the industry is evolving. It's evolving, especially in private markets. The standard isn't, there isn't a baseline standard, but we're ensuring that managers are reporting almost on a consistent basis and trying to make sure that when the reports do come out in the future, they are consistent. So we can see things like carbon emissions, and they're reported on a consistent basis. And I think the industry is evolving, certainly in private markets. I'll pause there and then
Yeah.
in a different part.
Anybody got any questions so far? No? Yeah, Maggie.
Just regarding slide 17, Glencoe, engaging with managers on a regular basis. You say you're engaging with them on a regular basis with the investments, and it's just really a question of what influence do you actually have? How do you influence? How do you challenge that? So it's how regularly and you know, how do you challenge? What influence do you feel you have?
Yeah, I'll answer this question in two parts. So first on public markets and then separately on private markets. I think it's safe to say LGPS as a pool, a central pool, is almost now a desirable investor or a desirable LP. So when we look to engage, we like to engage almost as a community. So not only just us as a central pool. If there are other pools who are committed to the same manager or a same position, then we can engage with parties in order to try and press certain issues, and we've had some success with that really over the last few years as a collective investor group. Last year we had success with large companies such as Barclays and Shell, where we pushed for additional disclosures, for example. So I think whilst we may not be the largest shareholder in Shell or the largest shareholder in Barclays, we are able to work with other investors to ensure that certain issues are present. I think that sort of demonstrates that on a public basis we are able to get traction. On private markets, again, we are long-term investors in private markets. A lot of the funds that we go into are closed-ended funds, so you're invested for 10 and infrastructure potentially longer, 15, 20 years. So in the event that a manager doesn't report in a particular way, then when they come to raise again in a few years' time, it's almost the leverage that we can use to say, well, you're not quite up to scratch there. So can you do things to improve? And I'll come on to later on in the infrastructure example on how we've been able to do that with quite a large infrastructure manager here in Europe.
Mr. Chairman,
okay. Thanks, Mary.
Brilliant. I'll go on to infrastructure very quickly now. That works. The public.
Yeah, that's fine.
This is the infrastructure. Now, there were a few appendix slides, but unless there's any particular question, I wasn't going to go into those in a lot of detail.
All of 1 minute then, Chair, thank you. So we're going to get a report from Nadeem, focusing purely on LGPS Central's infrastructure fund. Just a bit of background for everybody here that the fund has an infrastructure allocation managed by 7 infrastructure managers. As at March 31st, 2024, the fund's total infrastructure valuation was 628 million, or 10%. The fund has a weighting to infra, typo there, it says PE, it's infra, set at 12.5%, so we're slightly underweight, it's about 160 million, is that 2.5%-ish. We do have a standing commitment of about 140, so that'll get us most of the way there, and we'll probably need to commit some more over the next year or so. The table at 4 highlights all the fund's 7 managers across both closed-ended funds and open funds. That was all I had to say.
Nadeem, over to you.
Thank you very much. And just by way of background, I used to work at an infrastructure manager, so this is an asset class that's that I could probably speak for longer than we have time here today. So just in terms of an infrastructure market backdrop of the last few years, certainly what we've seen is infrastructure managers now merging with larger private equity funds, because I think larger private equity funds have seen that if they don't offer infrastructure, the amount of growth that's projected because of energy transition, renewables, digitalization, key firms, and the sheer volume of capital that's required over the next 15, 20 years in order to meet net zero targets is considerable. So anyone any large PE manager that didn't have infrastructure or wasn't very well established is looking to acquire managers. So last year we saw some really significant mergers or acquisitions of infrastructure managers. We saw Global Infrastructure Partners being acquired by BlackRock, CVC, a large private equity manager, acquired Dutch Infrastructure Fund. Energy Capital Partners was acquired by Bridgepoint, and Actis were acquired by General Atlantic. So a lot of movement in the market in terms of acquiring infrastructure, because actually, the cynic in me will say they're looking for this because it's a long-term asset class and it's long-term fees for the manager, but actually there is more going on within the industry. But it's fair to say our private markets as a whole, the fundraising activity has been difficult out there because a lot of managers have or allocators have decided there's attractive opportunities in other asset classes such as fixed income because of where the macro environment interest rates are raised. So actually putting money in fixed income markets is almost as attractive as putting money in equity infrastructure, which is a bit of a higher risk asset class. But nonetheless, it's one where we anticipate there to be continued activity over certainly the short to medium term in order to meet various government initiatives to reach items such as net zero. We've obviously got 2 strategies in infrastructure, and the strategy which Leicestershire are part of is the Core Plus infrastructure strategy. Now that is the lower end of the risk spectrum, so it's typically assets that are brownfield, they're operating, they're continuing to give a yield. There isn't huge amounts of construction or development risk, and it's at the lower end of the risk spectrum, whereas value-add opportunistic infrastructure is slightly higher risk. It's often in technologies potentially that are less developed, so things like battery storage or carbon capture tend to fall into those buckets. The Core Plus Fund, we're quite a large size now, 828 million. And this is capital that's being deployed to those funds, but it's being drawn over time. So whilst the fund has been set up since 2021, we've continued to deploy partner fund capital as those commitments come. So there is a lag between when partner funds do commit capital to us and that gets deployed by the underlying managers. Slide 9 gives you an overview of each of the partner funds commitments in the Core Plus fund, and Leicestershire's is 135 as can be seen here today on page 9. Slide 5 gives an overview of the Core Plus fund. So as of December 2023, now one of the another nuance of private markets is performance reporting is often lagged because it's not daily, it's not real time. We do run in a quarter lag, so our March 2024 performance will be reported by the end of June. So we're a couple of weeks away from reporting the March performance, but this shows the NAV as of 31st of December. The fund is drawing capital in Core Plus infrastructure. We are seeing that capital is drawn a bit quicker, especially with large open-ended infrastructure managers who have a portfolio already and have a pipeline of assets. They're able to draw that capital quite quicker. So 4 of the 8 managers that we have committed to have now drawn that capital, and overall we're about 63% drawn. Performance to date, performance will be volatile in the initial years. It does show 1.4% here, which, you know, a year ago that was a completely different number. So, and that's really because as capital is drawn, if capital is drawn on, let's say, 15th of December, there's not really going to be any valuation change between 15th of December and the 31st of December. So that we expect that in the early years to be volatile as that capital is drawn, and that will continue to be the case until we are 100% committed. But the target for our infrastructure funds is a CPI target, so a long-term CPI target plus 3.5%. I've included here on the second row the JP Morgan sleeve, which is a separate sleeve that we created to hold the IIF asset. Now, I appreciate Leicestershire's holding in JP Morgan IIF is separate and it's not within LGPS Central, but it's one that we manage as well. So the interesting aspect of this is really as an asset or as a fund, it is quite established, so it does give you the return straight away. It's one of the oldest infrastructure funds out there, so deploying capital is quite quick, and you almost immediately get a yield. I'll go through quickly slide 11 and slide 12, which gives you an overview. The first pie chart, our targets. I think the key thing that I'll draw out here is what we amended our strategy last year really to increase our renewables target. So previously it was 15 to 45%. We've increased that to 20 to 50%, and that's really to take advantage of the opportunities. With our existing investments and assuming they're fully committed and the targets that they're hoping to achieve, that will give you an overview of what the portfolio will look like in the middle chart once it's fully drawn. And as of 31st of December, it shows you the exposure with the amount of assets that have drawn capital. Slide 11 is a similar chart, but it looks at geography as opposed to subsector classes. We're targeting 20 to 30% in the UK, and one of our fund managers, Equitix, have drawn the full capital. So the chart on the far right of page 12 shows that our UK exposure is high, but that will reduce over time as the other funds draw capital. On slide 7, I thought it'd be interesting for the committee to know the renewables or energy transition managers that we've committed to. So we've committed to Next Energy UK, which is a UK solar developer, one which is focused in the UK, but also on one particular asset, and one that we are quite proud of as an LGPS because it's attracted other LGPS investors, but also given us quite an attractive fee, and pleased to say that is performing well so far. IFM, one of the largest global infrastructure managers out there, we've committed to their net zero infrastructure fund only last year, and that's drawn all of its capital as of the beginning of this year. And most recently, we committed to Macquarie Green Energy Climate Opportunities Fund, again targeting renewable energy assets, but in an open fund structure. So in the event that we, for whatever reason, need to redeem or it's not performing, not going the way we want to, we can have some liquidity in the future. Those are still sort of deploying capital, so we will see the performance of those funds come through in time. finally, on slide 8, I thought I'd draw out the RI integrated status. Again, in infrastructure, it's core to what we do. It's probably more mature in infrastructure relative to the other asset classes, just because of the assets that we invest in. A lot of the managers that we invest with, they'll invest in things like solar renewable assets, wind farms, etc. So those sort of key climate metrics and will be easier to report on in infrastructure assets than potentially other asset classes such as private credit. But again, the industry is working to a level where that reporting is consistent across managers. A lot of those managers, such as Next Energy or IFM or Macquarie, are further ahead of the curve than others who do sort of traditional infrastructure in transport or utility companies. That's all I had to say on infrastructure, but happy to answer any additional questions.
Thank you, Naveen. Hilary, have you got a question?
Well, it's a question and a comment regarding the infrastructure, and you mentioned solar farms and wind farms, etc. As I understand it, there is a problem with some of that at the moment, that they cannot link into the national grid because the national grid is not capable of taking it. So a lot of organisations, including mainly councils, are passing permissions for solar farms, wind farms, etc., but they can't come forward because the national grid. So is that a risk that you're aware of, that if we're putting all this in one basket almost, we have to look at the broader picture besides other forms of green energy that are being investigated? I mean, we have the same problem with electric cars, all sorts of things. So it is much broader spectrum than just investing if it can't come to fruition.
Yeah, absolutely. A very, very, very good question. And there's no secret that the grid, not only here in the UK, any grid network around the world is a bottleneck to all solar renewables or wind renewables, and that continues to be the case. And until that, if you bid for a project now, you almost have to bid for it in the event that you get permission in 5 years' time, or potentially even longer. So actually, that continues to be a bottleneck. So where we see the industry evolving is other potential solutions. So whether that's large scale hydrogen plants, or even utility scale batteries, where they're able to manage that grid fluidity. So when there's shortage of power on the grid, then that utility scale batteries can come and help. So one of the managers that I mentioned, Next Energy, have recognised that. So a lot of their solar plants here in the UK will also have a co-located battery plant as well. So knowing all for well, solar can vary. We all know the weather here in the UK. The amount of sunlight that you get can vary day to day across seasons. So actually storing that energy, but then releasing it to the grid when it is possible, is an additional solution. But you're right, that continues to be a bottleneck. And if you look at infrastructure as an asset class, your focus shouldn't only be on, look, let's just invest in renewables asset because they're great for the environment and that's the future. But it's really getting a broader exposure to infrastructure as an asset class.
Okay. Sorry. Oh, Paul.
Yeah, so I think you sort of touched upon this as well, but I think with lots of elections around the world this year, especially when it comes to infrastructure, I think that's going to play a big part in it. And the UK sort of like, what does that look like then? Sort of, if like, I know renewables is a big part and sort of a certain allocation is sort of assigned to that. But should a lot of those infrastructure projects not go ahead, particularly looking at places like North America, what would then be the implications from our investment sort of point of view?
Sure. So the big thing that happened in the US was the Inflation Reduction Act 2 years ago, which was, a huge number, $1 trillion worth of, in effect, tax credits to encourage investment into renewables. Depending on where the election goes, I think both parties will still want to continue down that path. And really, if you talk to US commentators out there, it's not necessarily going to be at risk, because actually the way the US law works is that if something's been agreed, then it's quite difficult to change that. So a lot of that tax credit that was available through the Inflation Reduction Act, we'll see that continuing to be available and will encourage that investment. Here in the UK, I think we're a bit further ahead than a lot of other advanced economies in terms of renewables. So actually, it's one of our differentiators compared to other markets out there. So we were the first to adopt subsidies for solar assets, for example, through ROC revenues that were introduced by the government, and that sort of has been almost copied by other jurisdictions. So I think we'll still be the leader in that. And actually, our renewable resources are a larger part of the energy mix compared to other jurisdictions. So I think we'll continue down that trend regardless of which way the elections come out here in the UK. So hopefully it shouldn't be detracting, and I think most political parties will want to continue down that trajectory.
Thanks, Ripon. Is there any other questions? No. Now, thank you all for coming along today and doing your presentations. But it's very interesting. It's quite reassuring in some ways to see the way that we're going. And I, like you, I like you, Nadeem, I can't really see whatever happens in the elections. I think it will continue to be a major part of what we do, responsible investment. So we're asked to note that report. Is that agreed? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for coming along today. Appreciate it, and the presentations. So the next next item is the date of the next meeting, which is going to be on the 6th of September 2024 at 9:30. Item 18, as previously stated, there are no urgent items. We now come to the item 19, which is exclusion of the press and public. I move that the public be excluded during consideration of the remaining items in accordance with section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, exempt information. Is that agreed? Yeah, agreed. Okay, will that include these two, Jen?